My name is Temujin. History would call me Genghis Khan, and this is my story. I was born in the year 1162 in the vast and unforgiving steppes of Mongolia. My name, Temujin, was given to me by my father, Yesugei, a chieftain of the Bergigin clan. The world I was born into was harsh, filled with constant raids, tribal conflicts, and a brutal fight for survival. Yet it was also a world that taught me the most valuable lesson I would carry throughout my life. Power and unity come only through struggle and sacrifice. I grew up in the shadow of my father's leadership, though my early years were marred by the tragic death of Yesugei. He was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatar, when I was only 9 years old. This event shattered our family. My mother, Holun, was left to fend for us alone. My brothers and I were forced to live in exile, abandoned by the very people who once supported my father. As a child, I had to witness the consequence of betrayal and loss. This would become the fire that ignited my ambition. The days after my father's death were dark. We lived in poverty, struggling to find food and shelter. The clan that once held power had now become a mere shadow of its former self. It was during these years that I was captured by a rival clan, the Tatar, who had a history of bitterness with my people. I was only about 10 years old when they enslaved me. My life became a series of hardships, treated like a mere animal, forced to serve the people who had taken me prisoner. I remember my desperation and my longing for revenge, but more importantly, I remember the drive to never again be weak. I managed to escape from the Tatar captivity, but the memory of those days haunted me. This was when I swore an oath to myself. I would never again allow myself to be weak or vulnerable. I would rise and I would lead with strength. These years molded me into the man I would eventually become, the man who would unite the Mongol tribes and establish an empire. But in my youth, I was just a boy who could only dream of greatness. As I grew older, I began to gather followers. These men were loyal to me, not because of birthright or status, but because of my ability to inspire them. I had learned to be ruthless, to be strategic, and above all, to be cunning. These were not the qualities of of a typical Mongol leader at the time, who often relied on brute force and the traditions of tribal hierarchy. And my vision was different. I saw that power could be built through loyalty, discipline, and the unity of disparate tribes. In my youth, I formed a bond with another young leader, Jamukha. We were like brothers in arms, both seeking to rise above the limitations imposed by our circumstances. Together, we led our small band of followers, raiding other tribes and gaining victories. But as we grew, so too did the differences between us. While I sought unity and reform, Jamukha believed in the old ways: tribal division, the dominance of aristocracy, and maintaining the traditional roles of the clan system. Our rivalry would only grow, and it would shape the course of my life. But it was during these early years of my struggle that I learned a critical lesson. The path to power is never smooth. Betrayal, loss, and hardship would accompany me at every turn. But these trials also hardened me, making me unyielding in my desire to rule. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had already started to forge my path as a leader. I began to pull together the scattered and divided tribes of Mongolia. I was relentless, for I understood that only through unity could we survive and thrive in a world where alliances shifted like sand. The dream of an empire was beginning to take shape in my mind, but it was not yet clear how I would achieve this vision or how long the road ahead would be. All I knew was that I could no longer afford to be weak. Looking back on those early years, I realized how much they shaped me. They taught me the value of loyalty, the importance of self-reliance, and the necessity of strength. But most importantly, they taught me to never forget where I came from. I would always be the son of Yesugei, the boy who had been betrayed, enslaved, and abandoned but I would also be the man who would unite the Mongol tribes and conquer the world. By the time I was in my early 20s, the world around me had begun to change. The boy who once lived in the shadow of death and loss was now a man with a vision that had been forged in the crucible of hardship. I had already escaped from captivity, witnessed the betrayal of friends and allies, and fought against rivals. Yet none of that would compare to what lay ahead. I would soon face the greatest challenge of my life, the battle for the Mongol throne. At this time, my once close bond with Jamuka had deteriorated into a fierce rivalry. We had begun as blood brothers, men with a shared ambition to rise above our tribe's limitations. However, it was clear that we were now on different paths. He, the traditionalist, wanted to maintain the old ways, where power was determined by bloodlines, while I knew that a new order was necessary. I believed that leadership should be based on merit, loyalty, and discipline, not by the accidents of birth. We disagreed on everything. Our alliance fractured, and soon we were at war. In 1187, the first significant confrontation between us took place. We faced each other in battle. Two former allies turned bitter enemies. The outcome was not one-sided. I was defeated, but it was not a defeat in the conventional sense. I had been driven back, but I did not give up. Jamuka, for all his strength, failed to see what I had learned in the crucible of my youth. True leadership is born in the moment of loss, not victory. While he celebrated his triumph, I began to gather more followers, those who believed in my vision. I fought several more battles, losing some and winning others, but each defeat only made me stronger. I knew that this was not about one battle or one war. It was about something much larger. The Mongol tribes were fractured, divided by ancient rivalries and clinging to outdated traditions. But I saw something in these people. I saw their potential. I saw that they could be united under a single banner, my banner, and I would not rest until I had forged a new Mongol empire, one that would be unstoppable. The path to power was not just about military might. It was about strategy, alliances, and the careful manipulation of others. I began to form alliances with other tribes, many of whom had once been my enemies. I understood that if I were to succeed, I needed to have the support of not just my own people, but of the other tribes as well. It was during this time that I realized one of the key principles of leadership. You cannot rise alone. You must build alliances, even with those who once sought your downfall. Now that I had secured my position as Khan, I knew the next step was to consolidate my power and unite the scattered and divided Mongol tribes. It was not enough to be the leader of a single tribe, no matter how powerful. The Mongol people were fractured by old loyalties and deep-seated rivalries that had festered for generations. To achieve my vision of a unified empire, I had to do more than just defeat my enemies. I had to convince my people that unity was the only path forward. The first challenge in this process was Jamuka. Though I had defeated him in battle, his claim to leadership was still strong in the eyes of many. He was a respected warrior, and some of the tribes remained loyal to him. I knew that to unite the Mongols, I needed to either bring him to my side or eliminate him as a threat once and for all, but I did not want to resort to bloodshed if it could be avoided. I sent emissaries to Jamuka, offering him a chance to join me in ruling the Mongols together, but my offer was rejected. Jamuka was a proud man, and he believed that the Mongol people should follow him, not me. This rejection sealed his fate. The bond we once shared had been broken, and now it was clear that there could be no peace between us. I could not afford to let him stand in my way. I prepared for war, and in 1206 I faced him once again. But this time, I was not just fighting for power, I was fighting for the very future of the Mongol people. This battle would not be like any other I had fought before. It would be the final test of my ability to lead and to unite. The conflict was fierce. Yamuka's forces were strong, but my army had grown in both number and discipline. I had built a force unlike any the world had ever seen, one that operated with precision and unity, driven by a single purpose, the creation of an empire. As the battle raged on, I ordered my men to use tactics that were unfamiliar to our enemies, surrounding them in waves, feigning retreat, and then striking with brutal force. The battle was a decisive victory for me. Jamuka was forced to flee, and many of his followers surrendered to my cause. With Jamuka defeated, I turned my attention to the other Mongol tribes. There were many who had remained neutral or had thrown their support behind him. To ensure the success of my vision, I knew that I had to not only defeat my enemies, but also win the loyalty of the tribes that had resisted my rule. I called another Grand Council of Mongol chiefs, where I would present them with a choice. Either join me in unity and share in the wealth and power of the Mongol Empire, or face annihilation. At the council, I addressed the assembled chiefs and spoke of a future in which the Mongols could be strong and united. I offered them a place in my new order, where merit, loyalty, and strength would determine their position, not birthright or ancestral power. I promised them land, wealth, and influence, but most of all, I promised them security. No longer would they have to fear the constant threat of tribal conflict. No longer would they have to endure the poverty and instability that had plagued our people for centuries. The tribes that had once resisted me began to see the wisdom in my words. One by one, they pledged their loyalty to me. I gave them the same opportunity that I had given to my own followers, to rise based on merit, not birth. Those who had fought against me now fought with me. The Mongols were no longer divided. They were one people, united under a single banner. With the tribes united, I turned my attention to the creation of a new code of laws, the Yasa, which would govern all Mongols. The Yasa was not just a set of rules, it was the foundation of the Mongol Empire. It emphasized loyalty, discipline, and respect for authority. It outlawed practices like theft, adultery, and betrayal, and it established a strict military hierarchy that would ensure the efficiency of our armies. The Yasa was a reflection of my vision for the future, a world in which the Mongols would be united, disciplined, and unstoppable. The unification of the Mongol tribes was not just a military achievement, it was a profound transformation of our people. It was the moment when the Mongols stopped being a collection of warring tribes and became a single nation, bound by shared values and a common purpose. But this was only the beginning. The Mongol Empire was not merely a dream anymore, it was a reality, and it would be an empire that would change the world. As I stood before the chiefs and the warriors who had pledged their loyalty to me, I felt the weight of history upon my shoulders. I had achieved what no one thought possible. The Mongols, once fractured and divided, were now united under my rule. I had fulfilled my promise to my people, and I knew that the road ahead would be one of conquest and glory. But even as I looked to the future, I did not forget the lessons of the past. I knew that the Mongols were strong, but they were only as strong as their unity. The tribes that had once opposed me now stood with me, and together we would embark on a journey that would shake the foundations of the world. The Mongol Empire was born, and I was its Khan. With the Mongol tribes now united under my banner, I turned my eyes toward the world beyond the steppes. The Mongol Empire had been forged from the fire of tribal conflict and strife, but it was time to test the strength of this new unity against a far greater foe. The first step in my campaign to build an empire would take me to the heart of northern China, to the Jin Empire, a powerful state that had long dominated the northern regions. The Jin were formidable, but I knew they were not invincible. The Mongols, now a force to be reckoned with, would challenge them on their own soil. In 1211, I set my sights on the Jin, whose capital city, Yanjing, modern-day Beijing, stood as a symbol of their power. For years, the Jin Empire had maintained its dominance through a combination of military strength and political maneuvering. But like all empires, the Jin were plagued by internal corruption, weak leadership, and complacency. I understood this weakness, and I knew that the Mongols could exploit it. But I also understood that the road ahead would be difficult and fraught with danger. This would not be a simple raid. It would be a full-scale invasion. To ensure success, I gathered my forces and began the long march southward. The Mongol army had been carefully trained and organized, and they were now a well-oiled machine. The men I led were loyal, disciplined, and capable of enduring hardships that would break lesser armies. Our cavalry, with its speed and maneuverability, would be the key to overwhelming the Jin. We struck quickly, using lightning-fast raids to weaken the enemy and sow confusion among their ranks. The Jin, initially confident in their strength, were caught off guard by our ferocity and the unrelenting speed of our attacks. We avoided direct confrontation with their main forces, preferring instead to strike at their supply lines and vulnerable outposts. Our tactics were simple but effective: harass, disrupt, and retreat before they could mount a counterattack. With each raid, we wore down the Jin's morale and resources. The Jin Emperor Xiaozong failed to respond with the urgency that the situation required. His forces were spread thin, and their defenses were unprepared for the Mongol onslaught. By the time they realized the gravity of the situation, it was too late. The Mongols had already laid siege to one of their key fortresses, and the momentum was firmly on our side. In 1215, after years of devastating raids and careful strategy, I achieved my first major victory against the Jin. Yanjing, the capital of the Jin Empire, fell to my forces. The city's walls were no match for the might of the Mongol siege machines, and the Jin defenders were overwhelmed by the swiftness of our attack. This victory was symbolic as much as it was strategic. The fall of Yanjing sent shockwaves through the Jin Empire and to the other states that would one day face the Mongol threat. It demonstrated that no fortress, no matter how well defended, was safe from the Mongol war machine. As I entered the city, I marveled at what we had achieved. The Mongol Empire, once a collection of scattered tribes struggling to survive, had now struck a blow to one of the most powerful empires in the world. But this was not just a victory over a rival empire, it was the first step in a much larger vision. The Jin were merely the beginning. Our success in Yanjing signaled the birth of an empire that would stretch across Asia and beyond. After the fall of Yanjing, I did not stop my campaign against the Jin. The victory had been a decisive blow, but the war was far from over. I understood that the Jin Empire was a complex structure, and though we had captured their capital, their military strength had not been entirely shattered. I continued to press the attack, destroying Jin fortifications, raiding their territory, and relentlessly pursuing their leaders. It was a brutal war of attrition, but I had no intention of leaving any room for the Jin to recover. The Jin Emperor Xiaozong, realizing that his empire was crumbling under the Mongol onslaught, sent emissaries to negotiate peace. He offered to pay tribute in exchange for the cessation of hostilities, but I was not interested in tribute. I was after complete domination. I demanded the unconditional surrender of the Jin Empire, and I made it clear that any future resistance would be met with swift and unforgiving retribution. By 1215, the Jin had been forced into submission. Their power had been broken, and the Mongol Empire had made its first major conquest. But this was not just about the capture of land or the destruction of an enemy. It was about sending a message to the rest of the world. The Mongols were not a people to be underestimated. We were a force that could not be ignored. The Jin, one rulers of a powerful empire, had fallen, and we, the Mongols, would rise to take their place. As I looked out across the plains of northern China, I could not help but feel a sense of fulfillment. This was only the beginning. The world had been changed by our presence. and there would be no turning back. The Jin Empire had fallen, and soon other empires would follow. With each victory, the Mongol Empire would grow stronger, its influence would spread further, and its power would be felt across the globe. But even as I reveled in the success of this campaign, I knew that the true test of my empire was yet to come. The world was vast, and many powerful empires still lay between us and our ultimate goal. The fall of the Jin was just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that would take the Mongol Empire to the very gates of Europe, the depths of the Middle East, and the distant lands of the East. But for now, we had proven our strength. The Mongols were unstoppable, and the world had been put on notice. After the fall of the Jin Empire, my victory over them rang through the world, shaking the very foundations of power. It was clear that the Mongol Empire was not to be underestimated, but even as I looked to the future with an eye on expanding my empire, I knew that the road ahead would not always be smooth. New threats, new opportunities, and new challenges awaited. The next great conquest was one that would stretch the might of the Mongol Empire to its furthest limits. The Khwarezmian Empire, located in what is now Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and parts of Afghanistan. The Khwarezmian Empire was a vast and wealthy state, ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, who had a reputation for arrogance, and the belief that he could stand against the Mongol tide. It was a belief that would prove to be his undoing. In 1218, my empire had grown large, and trade routes were vital for maintaining the flow of goods and resources. The Khwarezmians controlled key trading cities, including the bustling metropolis of Otrar, located along the Silk Road. I had sent a diplomatic envoy to Shah Muhammad, requesting safe passage for Mongol merchants to trade within his empire. We were not interested in war at this point. What we sought was peaceful trade. The prosperity of my people relied on the flow of goods, and the Khwarezmian Empire was strategically important for our future growth. But Shah Muhammad responded with disdain. He saw no need to accommodate the Mongols. His people seized our merchants, killed some, and confiscated their goods. Even worse, they slaughtered the members of the Mongol diplomatic mission. This act of dishonor and treachery was one I could not forgive. It was a direct affront to the Mongol people. The Khwarezmians had made a grave mistake, one they would come to regret. This was not merely a diplomatic incident, it was a declaration of war. The decision was made. In 1219, I gathered my forces and set out to punish the Khwarezmian Empire for their insolence. I knew the task would not be easy. The Khwarezmians were powerful, and their cities were heavily fortified. But I also knew that the Mongols were unmatched in their speed, discipline, and tactical ingenuity. We would show the Shah the price of dishonoring the Mongols. Our first target was Otrar, the city that had started this conflict. The siege was brutal and relentless. The Khwarezmian defenders, though brave, could not withstand the fury of our siege engines and the relentless onslaught of our forces. We surrounded the city, cutting off its supply lines, and then methodically wore down the defenders. It took months, but Otrar eventually fell, and with it, the first taste of Khwarezmian blood. The city's fall sent shockwaves through the empire, but this was only the beginning. The Shah, in a desperate attempt to salvage what he could, sent his generals to rally the defense of his remaining cities. He underestimated our resolve. His generals, though skilled, could not match the coordination and efficiency of the Mongol army. As we moved from one city to the next, we left no room for mercy. Bukhara, Samarkand, and many others fell one after another. Cities that had once been centers of culture, wealth, and power were reduced to rubble. I remember the day I entered Samarkand, the jewel of Central Asia. It was a city of great beauty and wisdom, but it would not be spared. A message needed to be sent. The Mongols were not a people to be trifled with, and those who resisted would face utter destruction. But even as I laid waste to the Khwarezmian cities, I did not act recklessly. The Mongol military is built on discipline and strategy. Our warriors were not mindless destroyers. They were instruments of war, and their actions were guided by clear, precise orders. The brutality of our attacks was a tool, a way to break the will of the enemy. It was not about mere vengeance. It was about sending a message to the world that any insult against the Mongols would be met with swift, overwhelming force. The Shah, who had once believed himself safe in his empire, fled as his cities fell one by one. He sought refuge in the distant lands of the West, hoping that his enemies would protect him. But I did not allow him to escape justice. We pursued him relentlessly, through deserts and mountains, until he finally died in exile. His death marked the end of the Khwarezmian Empire. His empire, once vast and powerful, had been crushed under the might of the Mongol army. The conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire was one of the bloodiest and most devastating campaigns of my career. Entire cities had been destroyed, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The lands once rich with wealth and culture were now empty, barren, and haunted by the ghosts of those who had fallen. But it was not without reason. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire sent a clear message to the world. The Mongols were not to be trifled with. The consequences of dishonoring the Mongol Khan were severe, and anyone who stood against us would pay the price. As I looked upon the devastation that we had wrought, I felt no joy in the destruction. War is a necessary evil, but it is never a cause for celebration. The Khwarezmians had forced my hand, but I understood the cost of such campaigns. The Mongols were known for their ability to conquer and destroy, but we also understood the value of order, trade, and prosperity. It was not my intention to destroy the world, but to reshape it, reordering it under Mongol rule. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire marked a turning point in my reign. We had struck fear into the hearts of the world, but we had also secured our place as a dominant force on the world stage. My empire had expanded dramatically, and the Mongols now controlled vast territories across Asia. But our success in the East was not enough. The world was vast, and many great challenges still lay ahead. The Mongol Empire would continue to grow, and I would lead it to ever greater triumphs. But even as I reveled in our victories, I knew that the road would be long and the challenges many. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire was not just about the conquest of territory, it was about establishing Mongol dominance over the entire world. The message was clear. The Mongols were not just conquerors. We were masters of the earth, and any empire that stood in our way would face the same fate as the Khwarezmians. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire was a testament to the reach and ferocity of the Mongol war machine, but it was also a prelude to the greater challenge that lay to the west, the lands of Eastern Europe. Having established my empire in the east, it was only natural that we would set our sights on the territories beyond, places teeming with wealth and power. These lands were home to the Kievan Rus, a patchwork of kingdoms in modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, and various other states, including those of the Caucasus and the Polish territories. In 1223, as I solidified Mongol control over Central Asia, I turned my gaze toward the west. The Kievan Rus was a fragmented collection of kingdoms, much like the Mongols had been before our unification, and they were ripe for conquest. Their power was dwindling, and their unity was fractured. The Kievan princes, distracted by their internal squabbles, were vulnerable to the storm that was about to hit them. I dispatched a force of Mongol generals, led by my trusted commanders, Subutai and Jebe, to scout the region and probe the strength of the Rus. These generals were seasoned veterans, known for their unparalleled skill in battle and strategy. I trusted them completely to lay the groundwork for a campaign that would stretch far beyond anything the Mongols had faced before. In 1223, the Mongols met the Rus armies on the banks of the Kalka River. The Rus, having united under a loose coalition of princes, were confident that they could hold their ground against the Mongols. But they made the same mistake that many had before them. They underestimated the speed and mobility of the Mongol forces. Subutai and Jebe lured the Rus into a trap, feigning retreat and allowing the Rus to chase us across the plains. Then, at the right moment, we turned and struck with the full force of the Mongol cavalry. The battle was swift and brutal. The Rus, disorganized and unable to respond to the fluid tactics of the Mongols, were crushed. The remnants of their army were slaughtered, and many of their princes were captured or killed. The Battle of the Kalka River was a decisive victory, marking the first significant Mongol victory over the Kievan Rus. The message was clear. The Mongols were coming, but the victory at Kalka was not enough to secure the entire region. The Mongols did not simply conquer and leave, they sought to integrate and control. I knew that to truly subjugate the Rus, I would need to send another force to follow up, and I began to prepare for a full-scale invasion of the Kievan Rus. By 1230, the Mongol forces, having gathered strength, moved deeper into the heart of the Rus territories. The Rus, having felt the full weight of Mongol fury, tried to regroup and prepare for a defense, but they were already fractured beyond repair. Many of the cities, like Kiev, were poorly defended, and their walls could not withstand the might of the Mongol siege tactics. Kiev, the historic heart of the Rus, fell in 1240, but by this time the Mongols had already demonstrated their military dominance. It was not just the physical conquest of cities that mattered. It was the psychological warfare. The Mongols left nothing but destruction in their wake. Entire villages were burned, and anyone who resisted was put to the sword. We didn't just take territory, we broke the spirit of the people. The message was simple. Resistance to the Mongols meant annihilation. Many of the Rus princes and nobles submitted quickly to avoid the wrath that had befallen their neighbors. The Mongols knew no mercy for those who resisted. They only showed it to those who were willing to accept Mongol rule. As I led my forces across the region, I knew that the conquest of the Kievan Rus would not be the end of the Mongol push into Eastern Europe. In the years to come, my generals would turn their attention to the Caucasus, the Polish kingdoms, and even the Hungarian territories. The Mongols would not stop until we had claimed the lands of Eastern Europe as part of the growing Mongol Empire. But even in the face of such overwhelming power, I knew that the world was not just going to bow to us without a fight. The Western campaigns were not just about military conquest, they were also about sending a message to rulers of Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even the distant kingdoms of the Holy Roman Empire. The Mongols were not simply conquerors. We were a force of nature, unstoppable and undeniable. While we crushed the Rus, we also turned our attention to the Caucasus, a region rich in resources but divided by its own internal struggles. Here, I encountered the kingdom of Georgia, which initially tried to resist our advance. They too would come to know the Mongol wrath. The Georgians, under their queen Tamar, fought bravely, but the Mongol tactics were too much for them. Cities like Tbilisi were taken, and the Mongols left a mark of devastation that would be remembered for generations. By 1230, the Caucasus had fallen under Mongol rule, and the way was paved for future expansion. It was not just about cities or armies, it was about dominance. The Mongol Empire was growing in ways that no one could have predicted. The heart of Europe itself was beginning to feel the tremors of Mongol might. The Rus and the Caucasus were stepping stones for what was to come next. Looking at these conquered territories, I knew that my empire was not just a regional power anymore. It was an empire that stretched across continents, and it was only getting bigger. The Mongol Empire had already become a world power, and we were just getting started. Our reach now extended from the deserts of Central Asia to the lush forests of Eastern Europe, and no power would be able to stop us. Our empire, though young, was already shaping the world to come. By the time we had crushed the Kievan Rus and expanded our influence into Eastern Europe, The Mongol Empire was already one of the largest and most formidable forces on the planet. But my vision for the empire could not be contained by the lands of the steppes, Central Asia, or Eastern Europe. Our destiny lay further west, in the lands of the Middle East, where ancient empires and powerful civilizations had flourished. The heart of the Islamic world, centered in the Abbasid Caliphate, was my next target. Their campaign began in the region of Persia, where they encountered the Khwarezmian remnants still clinging to power after the fall of their empire. The remnants of the Khwarezmians, having been chased out of their homelands, had taken refuge in the western parts of the empire, hoping to rebuild their strength, but they were no match for the Mongols. By 1236, the Khwarezmian forces were decisively defeated, and their leaders were either killed or forced to flee further into the west. From here, we pressed on, marching through Persia and striking at the heart of the Seljuk Sultanate. By 1239, the Seljuks were unable to withstand the Mongol advance, and their cities fell like dominoes. The Mongol tactics were unmatched: swift cavalry charges, precision archery, and well-coordinated siege efforts. Persia had fallen, and the way was clear for us to continue into the heart of the Islamic world. But the true prize was the Abbasid Caliphate itself, the great city of Baghdad. In 1258, the time had come. The Mongol siege of Baghdad was one of the most brutal and devastating in history. We surrounded the city, cutting off all supply lines, and began our siege in early 1258. Baghdad's defenders, though numerous, were no match for our tactics. The Mongol army had learned the art of siege warfare from years of experience, and we employed every method at our disposal: battering rams, catapults, and siege towers. We had no intention of simply taking the city, we intended to break it. Once the city walls were breached, our forces poured in. Baghdad, which had once been a great city of culture, learning, and wealth, fell into chaos. The people trapped within its walls faced death and destruction at every corner. The Caliph, refusing to surrender, was captured and executed in a gruesome display of Mongol power. The city was plundered, its libraries burned, and its mosques destroyed. The entire city was razed, its grand buildings reduced to rubble. The destruction was total. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate and the end of an era in Islamic history. The Caliphate, which had once ruled vast swathes of the Middle East, had been destroyed by the Mongol war machine, but the conquest was not just about the fall of a political entity. It was about sending a message to the Islamic world and to all other civilizations. The Mongols had arrived, and we would not be stopped. The year was 1227, and we were deep in the heart of another campaign, the final campaign of my life. The Tangut people, who dwelled in the land of the Western Shia, had once stood as enemies to my people. They had resisted our rise, and I had sworn to bring them to heel. By this time, I had achieved so much. My empire had stretched across Asia, from the steppes to the heart of China, from the gates of Persia to the edge of Eastern Europe. But as all men know, nothing lasts forever. We were waging war against the Western Xia in the northern part of what is now China. The campaign was fierce, but I was not unfamiliar with such battles. The Tanguts had proven themselves resourceful, and their resistance had been stubborn. As I rode with my forces urging them on, I felt a sharp pain, one that would prove to be the beginning of the end. Some say I fell from my horse during an engagement with the Tangut defenders. Others claim it was the strain of the campaign that finally broke me. Injuries from a fall, combined with the constant demands of war, ultimately claimed my life. But the true details of my final moments remain shrouded in mystery. The reports vary, and rumors have circulated for years about the exact nature of my death. Some say it was the wound inflicted during battle, while others suggest it was a sickness that overtook me after years of relentless conquest. Whatever the cause, my life was nearing its end. The strength that had carried me through so many years of war and struggle was fading. I knew that my time was coming, and I had no illusions about what that would mean for my empire. The Mongol Empire, this vast, powerful force that I had built, could not remain strong without leadership. My thoughts turned to my sons and their succession. Before I died, I had taken the necessary steps to secure the future of my empire. Ogedei, my third son, had long shown himself to be a worthy leader both in battle and in matters of governance. It was he whom I had chosen to lead after my passing. Ogedei was wise, strong, and capable, traits I had observed in him over the years as we fought side by side. His leadership would ensure that my vision for the Mongol Empire continued to unfold even in my absence. I summoned Ogedei to my side during my final days, and though my body was weak, I spoke to him of the importance of unity. I told him that our people were a great and powerful nation, but such greatness would not endure if there was division at the top. The empire must remain united under a strong ruler, and that ruler would be him. I entrusted him with my legacy, the Mongol Empire, the vast territories we had conquered, and the unyielding spirit of the Mongol people. I made it clear that he would not be alone in this task. His brothers would support him, but the final authority would rest with him. I knew that Ogedei had the temperament and the ability to lead, but I also knew the challenges he would face. My empire was young, and its borders were vast and diverse. There would be those who would try to challenge his rule, and there would be internal strife, as there always is in an empire. But I had every confidence that Ogedei could hold the empire together, and I took comfort in knowing that he would continue the work we had begun. Before my death, I also made provisions for the rest of my sons. Jebe, my second son, had shown remarkable military prowess, and Tolui, my eldest, had long been a trusted general. Both would play critical roles in the future of the empire, ensuring that the Mongols continued their expansion and consolidation. I knew that the legacy of the Mongols would not rest on the shoulders of a single ruler. It would rest on the strength of our family and the loyalty of those who followed us. As I took my final breaths, I knew that the Mongol Empire was in good hands. The world would continue to change under our rule, and the Mongol banner would rise ever higher. My death did not mean the end of the Mongol dream. It meant a new chapter. The empire would continue just as I had always planned. The conquest would not cease. The Mongol would press on, ever onward, expanding and consolidating their power until the earth itself could no longer bear the weight of our empire. After my death, my body was returned to the steppes, to the land that had birthed me. My tomb remains unmarked, hidden from the eyes of the world. It is said that my burial site is a secret, so that no one might disturb it. But the truth is that I am part of the land now, as much a part of the earth as the Mongol people themselves. The empire I built did not fall with me. It continued to grow, as my sons and grandsons carried on the work I had begun. Under Ogedei, the empire would see the beginning of its greatest expansion, stretching further into Europe, China, and the Middle East. My legacy lived on in their campaigns, and in the vast administrative systems I had established to govern the far-reaching territories we controlled. Though I am gone from this world, the spirit of the Mongol Empire endures. I did not build this empire for fame or for glory. I built it for my people, for the Mongols. It was always about the people, about giving them a future of prosperity and strength. My death was not the end of that future. It was merely a passing. The Mongol Empire would endure, and it would continue to shape the world in ways that no one could have imagined.